Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much, Anjali. First of all, thanks a lot for inviting me, giving me this opportunity to speak to you. I would begin by paying my homage to Sunil, whom frankly I didn't know, but I heard so much about him that I could not resist the temptation of being associated with a lecture in his honor. I also fondly remember Professor Choker, who was a friend and with whom I worked quite closely. In fact, this is not the first time that I am doing duty for him, because he was scheduled to speak at the India International Center, and I was scheduled to speak 2 weeks after that, after his lecture. A day before he passed away, I got a call from IIC and said that Mr. Choker is not well and he has requested that his lecture should be deferred. So could you step in for him and he will take your slot? I agreed, not realizing that next day he would be no more. But although I am doing duty for him, I am not stepping into his shoes. They are too large for me to occupy. But when I came when I was reading in the morning and thinking about what I should say, I incidentally came across an interesting fact that today happens to be the National Public Broadcasting Day. I didn't know that till I came across this tidbit, and this is to mark the first public address on All India Radio by Mahatma Gandhi in 1947, 12th November. So to commemorate that, they celebrate this as a National Public Broadcasting Day. Let's all wish and hope that the public broadcaster lives up to the purpose for which it was created. Now, we've been through 25 years of the 21st century, and quarter of a century is a good time for doing some stock taking on where we are, especially in terms of the hope that was raised in the 20th century about the spread of democracy. In fact, I have been associated with the climate change as well, and I used to think that three big challenges which we face in the 21st century, they pertain to the growing inequality in the world, they pertain to climate change, and also the status of democracy. In fact, these challenges, when you look at them today, and the people who are responsible for managing these issues, I find a very strange pattern. As far as the increasing inequality in the world is concerned, and I'm talking about economic inequality, I think the regimes of the world are quite indifferent to it. And I feel they have resigned themselves to the markets, that let the markets do what they're doing. And it's pretty much not within their domain or even probably their inclination to delve into this. As far as climate change is concerned, and by the way, there is a conference going on right now in Brazil, the COP30. So there I feel that the regimes of the world, they have two responses. One is of denial, and we know how many countries led by the US are retreating from climate change. And also I think there is a reluctance on the part of governments to work together, different countries to work together in dealing with what they all believe is a global challenge. And no individual country can do pretty much to either mitigate or satisfactorily combat this problem of climate change. Because you are not essentially responsible for the consequences that you face. As far as democracy is concerned, I think there again, all the reports which are brought out by international organizations on assessing the status of democracy, they tend to show that there is a backsliding. And what was expected as a movement which will grow, spread further and deeper, is actually shrinking. I think Larry Diamond calls it democratic recession, just as you have economic recession. So he calls it democratic recession. And the other day I was reading an article by Pratap Bhanu Mehta, who quoted John Adams, the one-time president of the US, who talked about how democracies exhaust themselves. And if I'm allowed to quote him, he says, democracy never lasts long. It soon wastes, exhausts, and murders itself. I think he said it more than 200 years back. But when you look at the report of these international organizations, and you must permit me to share a few statistics so that we understand the kind of process that we are going through. I happened to deliver a talk on Loktantra ka Bhavish Sawalon ke Ghere mein in Calcutta recently. So that is the time when I refreshed my knowledge and information about all these reports. So the interesting thing which I found in these reports was that one of them said, the Global State of Democracy Report 2025, brought out by International IDEA, it talks about how till 1800 there was hardly any democracy in the world. In fact, what it says is that there were two countries which were classified as electoral autocracies. And the number of people who lived in these regimes were about 22 million. This is obviously after the French Revolution. And then, interestingly, even in the 20th century, in the beginning, in the first half, there is not too much of democratization which happens in the world. I was surprised when I read that in the UN Charter in 1945, the word democracy was not even mentioned. In fact, they use an expression, we the people, which probably underlines the fact that the will of the people must infuse the working of all governments. That is implied. But the fact is that in 1950, according to this data, democratization spread and there were about 220 million people who were living in what they called liberal democracies and about 230 living in electoral democracies. So say about 45 crore people in the world had moved into regimes which were democracies. But by 1990, this number swells to 3 billion. And in 2016, more than half the population of the world is supposed to have lived in regimes which are classified as both liberal and electoral democracies. But now when you see the report of 2025, and this is across institutions, whether it is the IDEA Institute, or it is the Economic Intelligence Unit of the Economist, or it is Freedom House, and there is one more, VDEM, These are the major institutions which bring out reports. So all of them, they point out that this process of backsliding is going on, and you assess. There are various parameters, but the 4 parameters which they use to assess the state of democracies, one is representation, second is rights, third is rule of law, and fourth is participation. So they observe that in all the 4 parameters, there is a decline across the world. And then further, VDEM has this classification of putting countries into closed autocracies, electoral autocracies, electoral democracies, and liberal democracies. And there are some countries which are here or there, or neither here nor there, in the gray zone. So according to their report of 2024, and this is something which I'm sure might not be new to everyone, but this is a cause of concern. What the report says is 94 countries suffered decline along these parameters, or at least on one of these parameters. And the level of democracy, according to this analysis, is back to what it was in 1985. Clearly, they are observing that there is a wave of autocratization in the world, and for the first time in 50 years, 88 countries are classified as democracies, 91 are classified as autocracies. So the number has shifted in favor of autocracies. And some other data which would be interesting is that the share of world population in autocratizing countries has gone up from 7% in 2004 to 38% in 2024, and the total number of populations living in countries classified as autocracies has gone up from 49 to 72%. And conversely, democratizing countries have gone down from 13 to 6%, and democracies' total population has gone down from 51 to 28%. So, on the whole, about 5.8 billion people are living in autocracies, 3.7 of them in electoral autocracies, and 2.1 of them in closed autocracies. And then, of course, 12% people live in liberal and 17% live in electoral democracies. Now, some of you might have read a book called People versus Democracy, which was written by a German professor working in Harvard, Yashka Monk. I think it was published in 2018, February. And he had more or less forecast the trend. And the one thing that I distinctly remember, which is relevant for our discussion, he said that you are entering an era in which democracies will become illiberal and so-called autocracies will appear to be becoming liberal. And the data which I have just mentioned, I think substantiates what Yashka Monk had said. Now, obviously, the interest would be that where does India stand in all this? We may not like it, but the analysis which these institutions have made shows that along all these parameters, there is a decline observed in India as per their assessment. And from being a grey electoral democracy, India moves into grey electoral autocracy, and then now they put it in the bucket of confirmed electoral autocracy. All the same, India continues to be among the top 25% countries and continues to be classified as a flawed democracy, which even US is classified as, if that can give us any comfort. So on the whole, this is how things stand. Now, one of the books which I read while I was going to Calcutta was another interesting book which I want you to refer to. It is called India's Improbable Democracy, Battles Half Won. It's written by an Indian, Ashutosh Vashni. And he says that there were 3 projects at the time of independence. Of course, first he analyzes that how Mahatma Gandhi played a stellar role in welding the country together into a nation which it was not earlier, and how post-independence Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru infused the spirit of democracy in various institutions in India. So that's what he's talking about. And he says that the 3 projects which India had was A, national unity, B, dignity, social dignity for people, and C was eradication of mass poverty or alleviation of mass poverty. The interesting observation that he has made in one of the essays is, I like the sentence. He says, democracy has become the institutionalized common sense of Indian politics. Incidentally, this book was written in 2013. So, all the analysis which I shared with you is post 2013. But to my mind, the central point which I liked, which he raises, is that when we analyze what is wrong with Indian democracy, it is equally important to analyze how India has survived as a democracy for the last 8 decades. Because all over the world there are instances, particularly in the neighborhood, of a lot of turmoil. But amid this turmoil and amid all the tensions and differences within the country, India continues to be a democracy. So whoever tries to find the reasons of what is wrong with Indian democracy must also try to understand the factors which are the strengths of Indian democracy. Now, I'm not getting into all that, but to my mind, one of the strengths of the Indian democracy has been the integrity of its electoral processes. The fact that we have had 18 general elections successfully, the fact that more than 400 state assembly elections have taken place where governments have been formed, changed in many cases peacefully, the fact that nobody has till now said that I refuse to accept the mandate of the people. I think this is an important thing to appreciate, internalize, and I think it flows from the fact that the Election Commission of India, as it was conceived in the Constitution and as it evolved over time, has done signal service to the democratic processes in the country, at least in terms of a democratic election process. I am very fond of saying that the way Election Commission was conceived by the framers of the Constitution, apart from giving it the 3 responsibilities which we will talk about subsequently, to my mind, of all the constitutional bodies, this is the only body which has a direct truck or relationship with the people of the country. Because its responsibility lies in ensuring that people have their constitutional right to vote, and B, to creating a situation in which they are enabled to vote, and 3, to provide a level playing field when the process of election is on. If you look at all other constitutional bodies, whether it is the parliament or the courts, the tribunals, the Public Service Commission, the Finance Commission, all these institutional bodies, their work is in some way or the other related to the government. But Election Commission of India's work, its mandate, has no relationship with the government. It depends on the government for resources. That's fine, whether it is budgetary or manpower. It has to, because it is inconceivable that an organization which is mandated to conduct periodic elections should have a vast body of dedicated manpower. It's very unproductive, because last count in 2024 general elections, there were more than 11 lakh or about 11 lakh polling booths, and the total manpower employed in conducting elections was something like 15 million people. So obviously you don't need that manpower. But the Constitution, and this is unique about Indian Constitution, that it vested the Election Commission with the power to commission or to requisition the resources from the government. And I think they were careful not to use the word government, but president or governor. So that is the way this institution has been conceived. And I think it served its purpose pretty well. However, when you look at the recent past, and it is not that there were no controversies earlier, there have been controversies, but what happens with public institutions is that the amount of controversy about them which people talk about or believe in is proportionate to their credibility. So as long as you are very credible and the people think that yes, we can trust this institution, they will be able to digest any controversy about your institution. Of course, they will ask questions. But of late, an institution which always worked with transparency as its main tool is seen to be not so transparent in everything that it does. Secondly, especially in terms of the intensive revision exercise that was conducted, I think it received a lot of flack. And the flack was not on account of what it did, but what it intended. And that intention, unfortunately, came out through some of the phraseology which was employed in the notification which was issued on 24th of June. So revision of electoral roll is their constitutional mandate. It is a statutory responsibility. Nobody can take it away from them. And there have been revisions conducted for many, many years. In fact, some of them are annual. So there are various kinds of revisions which are done. First, the word used was special intensive revision, which is not used in law. But they are authorized, and accordingly they coined this word, because there is a provision for intensive revision, there is a provision for summary revision, and there are annual revisions which are carried out mandatorily in the state which is facing elections. But anyhow, this time the word used was special intensive revision. But more than that, I think there were two things which created further problem. One, they divided the existing electors into two categories, pre-2003 and post-2003. So this is a body of electors who have been enrolled after following the due process prescribed by the Election Commission. And in the notification of 24th of June, they have admitted that all these 7.89 crore people were enrolled following the due process and satisfaction of the ERO. So, having gone through this process, what was the justification of making a distinction between the two groups? That's one point which is difficult to understand. Number two, even the electors who were enrolled after 2003, they were also put in three different categories, which had no basis as far as the Representation of People's Act or the registration of electoral rules is concerned. But the alignment which was being done through this classification was with the Citizenship Act. Now, but I think the most controversial part was that they used the word in the notification that those who were enrolled till 2003, it is a probative evidence of their eligibility and a presumption of their citizenship. Now, presumption of citizenship is a phrase never employed by the ECI earlier. And secondly, an organization which actually was very friendly to the electors, which was very inclusive, and which adopted procedures which were, as I said, transparent and well understood by everyone. They decided that this time we will follow a procedure in which the burden of establishing your eligibility is on the elector. It is not the duty of the commission to ensure that everybody is enrolled. So that is something which changed. And people used to feel, and in fact it has been argued everywhere, that the fact that India has been able to achieve such a healthy 98-99% EP ratio is because of the inclusive approach that ECI has always followed. But that changed this time, and it led to considerable amount of controversy. And I don't think all the questions have been satisfactorily answered as yet, especially if the intention, as declared in the notification, was to remove ineligible electors and include eligible electors. That is a stated intent of the ECI. I'm not inventing this word. So, eligibility is defined in Article 326. And eligibility is very simple. You have to be a citizen. You have to be more than 18 years of age, earlier 21. You should not be disqualified by any law, under any law, or you should not be declared of insane mind. So these are the only four factors which make you eligible or ineligible. And all these 78, 77 years, this is what the ECI used to do. They would include citizens, fully conscious of the fact that it's a very tricky thing. Because in a country where no document is issued by the government to establish your citizenship, how do you believe that somebody is a citizen? But Election Commission said that, okay, if you want to enroll first time, just give an undertaking that you are a citizen of India. And give evidence, A, of your age, B, of your identity, and C, of your being ordinary resident in a particular place. So technically, the 65 lakh people who were removed in the first list in the draft electoral roll, 22 lakh were supposed to have died. So if you are dead, I don't think you are ineligible. You died, and by virtue of that, you ought to be out of the electoral roll, and that is something which is done regularly when rolls are updated. Similarly, if you have migrated from one place to another, you're not ineligible as an elector. It is only that you should be registered somewhere else, which is your ordinary residence. So the ineligibility as defined in 326, under that, we don't know how many people have been removed. So all these questions, I think, have led to some kind of credibility of the ECI to be hurt. Now, one more thing which I want to talk about, and of course we can tackle other questions during question answers, is the enforcement of the Model Code of Conduct. Now, the Model Code of Conduct is a document which was evolved in consultation with the political parties. Even though it has the force of law, it is not a law. So, Election Commission of India, by not acting like a referee who looks at every player in the same way, as per rules. If you are an umpire, you don't care whether Sunil Gavaskar is batting or Maninder Singh is batting or whoever is batting. You are supposed to conduct the game as per the rules of the game. So that is one. The other is that we saw instances in the last election where for complaints against individuals, notices were given to political parties. Now, in fact, I find it hard to understand that if an individual has not committed a violation, there is no cause for giving notice to the party. And if he has committed a violation because of which you are issuing a notice, then you should not be exempting the individual. So I think this anomalous approach led to a lot of questions. And the third thing, of course, is that the disclosure of data, which is either not timely or not fully, that has left people looking for more transparency. But on the Model Code of Conduct, I just want to spend 2-3 minutes on the conduct of the political parties themselves. Because after all, when a referee conducts a game, the general expectation is that everybody will try to follow the rule. But if more and more people are inclined to violate and dare the referee, then there is a problem. And that is where I think the political parties also owe a lot of explanation. They have to do a lot of soul searching, apart from the fact that there are other issues with the political parties in India. And that is integral to the democratic process in the country, because they are the principal players. We don't know still what is the legal character of a political party. Is it a company? Is it a society? Is it a trust? It's a charitable organization? Nobody knows what is the legal character. I think we need to ponder over this and decide how we are going to classify political parties. There are no provisions available in the law to deregister a political party. C, how do we allow tax exemption to an organization whose legal character is not known? But we allow political parties tax exemption. And the question which I keep asking myself, that if political parties, which are the central player of the democratic exercise, how many of them in the last 78 years or 74, 75 years of elections, how many of them have included electoral reforms in their manifestos? So, are they not interested in electoral reforms? I think we need to ask these questions as well. Let me also say a few words about the other pillars of the democratic edifice. Because after all, when the Constitution gave rights to individuals, it created bodies which should protect these rights. And there again, I think there are growing questions and anxieties. Let's take the Parliament. Parliament is meant to basically legislate. So, how much time is Parliament spending on legislation? How representative is the Parliament? Is it not disturbing if people or candidates say when they are seeking votes that if you don't vote for me, don't come to me after the elections? So the nature of our representation in our democracy is such that even if you are to vote, get 10% of the votes in your constitution, you are representing everybody. If you take the approach that those who don't vote for me, I don't look after their interests, that's not the way a democracy can function. For that matter, all those who are below 18 years who have no voting rights, nobody is going to look after their interests. And actually, the other day I went to one of the colleges and I was talking to the youngsters and they said, we feel that nobody bothers for the youth in terms of political parties. And that is why we don't get attracted to political parties. And the other thing is that I think in spite of the fact that we had the 73rd and 74th amendments to the Constitution, the strengthening of the local bodies, whether urban or rural, which are essentially, which should be responsible for looking after the day-to-day requirements of citizens, that's strengthening has not been a priority with any government. And that is why the citizen depends so much on the members of parliament or members of legislative assembly. If there was local bodies to look after your needs, I don't think you will bother so much about members of parliament or members of legislative assemblies. So for our day-to-day requirements, we have started looking at the central government or the state government. Whereas in a democracy, it should be the local bodies which should be equipped to handle all this. But whether they are being equipped? Take the judiciary. So again, several questions being raised about the judiciary, whether judiciary is timely and in an expeditious manner disposing of the cases which pertain to the rights of individuals, whether they are under trials under criminal laws or they are under preventive detention. So that there is a question mark. There is a question mark on the manner of appointment of people in higher judiciary. And I feel that people are divided. Sometimes they feel that judiciary has to be completely autonomous so that at least it can call government to question. On the other hand, there are people who will feel that no, there is a need to put some guardrails on the judiciary as well. How can in any democracy any institution be without checks and balance? So, but more than that, I think one of the things which really is bothersome is this tendency which of late one has seen in number of cases where people are held guilty of committing an illegality without being punished. So I don't know how we can run a system of or the rule of law if you hold people guilty of illegality and yet you stop short of awarding any punishment. There are a number of cases, I'm sure you are all aware of them. The media. So the corporatization of media. And these are all the processes which in some way or the other is making the democracy feeble. The corporatization of media, and you can't blame the corporates because the corporates have a profit motive. If they take over the media, they will do what is in their interest. But that is something which you are witnessing. So the media, which was considered to be one of the pillars, protecting the rights of people, voicing their grievances, asking questions to executive, are they performing that role? Clearly, that is an area which is bothering a lot of people. Now, before I conclude and in fact, I had many other things to say, but I find that I have almost exhausted my time. So, one central question which people keep asking on how do you strengthen democracy? And for this, allow me to go back again to the speech delivered by Dr. Ambedkar in the Constituent Assembly, where this question was actually, this point was raised. And what he said was, if we wish to maintain democracy, not merely in form, but also in fact, what must we do? There, first thing, in my judgment, we must do is to hold fast to constitutional methods of achieving our social and economic objectives. The second thing we must do is to observe the caution which John Stuart Mill has given to all who are interested in the maintenance of democracy, namely, not to lay their liberties at the feet of even a great man, or to trust him with powers which enable him to subvert their institutions. The third thing we must do is not to be content with mere political democracy. We must make our political democracy a social democracy as well. So, I think we need to look at all these issues. There are no easy answers to the times and the decline that we are witnessing. As I said, this is a wave of autocratization which the world is witnessing. And how we are going to cope with this are difficult questions, but they have to be kept alive. And I'll conclude by saying what I said in Calcutta, which was लोकतंत्र का भविष्य सवालों के घेरे में. सो लोकतंत्र का भविष्य सवालों के घेरे में तब आएगा जब सवाल लोकतंत्र के घेरे से बाहर निकल जाएंगे. सवाल उठाना और उनकी जवाब नहीं, उनके बारे में विचार करना ही लोकतंत्र के लिए काफ़ी है. एक्टिव कौन सी एक्टिविटी कब कामयाब होगी ये कहना मुश्किल है. But it is like when we install, and forgive me for using this analogy because I've been Secretary Environment, if you install solar panels, they will stop generating electricity if you don't clean them regularly. So if you want that democracy should continue to thrive and survive, then we have to keep looking at these questions again and again and ask these questions to all the institutions which are responsible for keeping the democratic process alive. Thank you.